Breaking tonight as critics launch new attacks on the Obama administration for failing to get tougher on Islamic terror. A new report surfaces from the Department of Homeland Security that outlines the threat from right-wing radicals right here inside the United States. Welcome to the Kelly File. I'm Shannon Bream in for Megan Kelly. This report is dated February 5th, but it just found its way to the media today. As the details go public, the administration is continuing to take hard questions about the just finished Summit on Combating Violent Extremism, an event focused on fighting terror through social media, empowering communities, and creating economic opportunity for would-be radicals. The conference was questioned for sounding more like an academic exercise than an action plan for taking on ISIS. And now this release of a report pointing at domestic right-wingers is raising questions about its timing and intent. We're looking at all the angles on the issue tonight with Dr. Ben Carson and Chris Steyerwalt. But first, let's go to Mr. Steyerwalt, our Fox News digital politics editor. All right, Chris, the conference has wrapped up, and now we have a new warning from DHS, maybe not new, but newly surfacing today, that we need to be looking out for people who have disputes, disagreements with their own government. Those are the scary guys.
Those are the scary guys. Now, we have heard this from the administration before. A report 5 or 6 years ago was along these same lines, and it targets what they call the sovereign citizen movement, which you probably haven't heard of, because there are probably a lot of people who are alleged to be at a number approaching 100,000 who don't even know that they're part of it either. But these are individuals who feel that the government is threatening their individual rights, individual liberties, that feel that they don't have to follow the law and could become violent. They cite a couple dozen instances over the last 4 or 5 years that they say are instances of this sovereign citizen movement. But I have to say this. The timing looks a little fishy when you have an administration that is pushing hard to find examples of violent extremism, as they call it, that are not involved with Islamist militants and Islamist terrorists, when they're looking for that, and all of a sudden, lo and behold, a new report appears from the administration that says that right-wing nut jobs are the real danger.
Yeah, and CARE today putting out a statement celebrating this and congratulating DHS, saying, you know, they got to keep their eye on the ball. They got to keep their eye on where the threats are. And we are very happy, not only for this report, but we also want to push the administration to do more to target the rise in violence against Muslims and others who share their faith.
Well, right. And we also heard from the controversial Southern Poverty Law Center, my apologies to Dr. Carson, who say that this is a growing threat. The sovereign citizen movement is a growing threat to the United States, and these folks are out there everywhere. But the problem is some of the incidents that they cite are folks who seem to be just plain deranged or just plain outlaws, not part of some cohesive movement or something that is banded together in the same sense that jihad would be or anything like that. This is just an undertone that is sensed by the administration that they say is out there. That doesn't please Americans who feel like they're already being squeezed a little too tight by a government who's watching them too closely, perhaps, but definitely dovetails with the administration's argument that the threat is everywhere, not just from Islam.
Well, and it's interesting because we dug back through some polls really over the last few months. CBS, CNN, and Fox. Also, when you ask people about, do you feel threatened by your government or that your rights in some way are threatened because of the size of the government, the reach of the government, in all of those polls across the spectrum, a majority of people said, yeah, I'm a little worried about my government and its control over my life and my rights. So does that mean all of those people should be on a DHS watch list? Are they, are they bubbling up and fomenting trouble?
Well, give it time. Maybe everybody can get on a watch list. No one will be. Everybody gets a trophy. Everybody gets on a watch list. No, I think what we're talking about here, they're talking about individuals who they say are radical or maybe just insane. But yes, when we talk about a government, when we talk about issues like everything from Ferguson to the NSA and everything else, there are grievances across the political spectrum, not just among conservatives, where people feel that the government is pushing them around, watching them too closely, and not getting off their backs.
All right. Chris Steyerwalt, always great to see you. Have a wonderful weekend.
You too.
All right, joining us now to react, Dr. Ben Carson, the former pediatric neurosurgery director at Johns Hopkins Hospital and the author of You Have a Brain. All right, Dr. Carson, Chris made a little bit of a reference to this in allusion to the fact that the Southern Poverty Law Center, I mean, not long ago, they basically classified you as an extremist. They talked about your views that marriage should only be between a man and a woman, your estimation that in some ways the takeover of health care in this country by Obamacare could be akin to slavery. They've since sort of apologized and retracted and said they still think you have a lot of extremist things to say, and they think that your views are something that most people would find extreme. So should we put you on a watch list too?
I guess probably all of us should be on a watch list if we don't agree with them. But you know, the interesting thing here is I think everybody can remember when they didn't want to do something, and all of a sudden everything else seemed more interesting. Well, that's what this administration is doing now. You know, a couple of weeks ago it was the Christian Crusaders. Now it's the sovereign citizens, because they don't really want to deal with the radical Islamic terrorists. They don't want to do what they know needs to be done. And it really is quite a shame. But the real problem is we don't seem to learn. In World War I, you know, Woodrow Wilson and Secretary Bryant, they didn't want to get involved. We finally got dragged in, you know, after the Lusitania. World War II, you know, Roosevelt didn't want to go in there. It took Pearl Harbor. What is it going to take for us to realize the existential threat that exists because of this? We keep saying, oh, they're junior league. They're not a threat to us. If they're a threat to the world, to another part of the world, they will be a threat to us. It's like a little bush right now, which will grow into a big tree, and it will be much more difficult to uproot it later on. Why can't we learn that?
Well, Dr. Carson, this administration has gotten a lot of heat because of the words it very carefully uses and the fact that it will use some language, isn't favored to using other language. There's been a lot said about the 21 Christians who were marched out, beheaded. It's all videotaped and spread around the world, and whether or not they would be identified as having been killed for being Christians. I want to play a soundbite from the leader of the UK's Coptic Christian Church, one of their leaders, and his take on our inability to say something more strongly about that incident.
It was a direct act of persecution of people who were Christians because they were Christians, and I was slightly uneasy with what was said on this side of the Atlantic, but I'm sure there is a reason for that, and I hope that if there is a chance to clarify, then it will be clarified.
All right, so this is a man who, you know, 21 Christians, specifically from his denomination, were marched out and killed for no other reason in that except that they were Christians. He seemed concerned that the U.S., which a lot of people across the world for decades have viewed as, you know, leaders of the free world, the moral authority in a lot of cases, although there are those who feel the exact opposite of the United States. But democracy-loving people like to think that the U.S. is going to stand out for what is right and for freedom. And that leader sounded a bit discouraged.
Well, it seems like the only thing that our leaders are willing to stand up for is political correctness, which is antithetical to one of the founding principles of our nation, freedom of speech and freedom of expression. And what we, the people, are going to have to do is stop allowing that to control us. And, you know, we're going to have to start thinking for ourselves. We're going to have to start thinking, what are we going to do to fight the threats that exist? If our government's not going to fight it, we're going to have to start thinking about what are we going to do. Our representatives are going to have to start thinking about what do they have to do. We're not helpless. We don't just sit around and wring our hands. People start thinking.
What can they do? I mean, the White House, the commander-in-chief, President Obama, is in charge. He is the rightful leader of the U.S. military. There are many within the ranks who have disagreed with him, but as long as he's in charge, what can anyone else do when it comes to combating this specific threat?
Well, I don't want to suggest what they do. I just want to suggest that they start thinking about it and start discussing it. It's sort of like the Patriots in the pre-revolutionary days. They didn't like what King George III was doing. they got together and they started talking about what kind of nation do you want to have and what can we do to make sure we get it. And they began to encourage each other and they began to come up with ideals. And that's how a ragtag bunch of militiamen defeated the most powerful empire on earth. We are Americans. We have a can-do attitude. We have to work together. We can do this.
Well, a lot of that will be the conversation for many leaders or hopeful leaders going through 2016. We'll keep an eye on you. And Dr. Carson, always good to see you. Thank you.
Thank you. Always, Shannon.
All right, we have breaking news tonight on how the administration has decided to respond after a judge blocked the president's plan to let millions of illegals stay in the U.S. And this is already making some folks angry.